Welcome to some new r/malicious compliance stories, where people comply to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. I hope you had a great day. The first story is called Can't Help With That. I used to work at a hotel that is part of a very large hotel chain. The management at my hotel, as well as more senior management, was all about nepotism. If you were related to or friends with someone in upper management, then you had some amazing career prospects ahead. We got a new food and beverage manager who was a golf buddy of the general manager and the executive chef. We'll call him Houston. Houston had previously managed a number of top restaurants in the city, including a Michelin star restaurant. Strangely though, he seemed to change jobs every 6 to 12 months. We soon found out why. The position he moved into oversaw 3 F&B departments with around 300 staff all up. Very quickly, we found that as well as not realizing that we weren't fine dining, Houston was the most horrible pig of a man that I've ever had to work with. He was a very tall, large man who would use his size to physically intimidate other staff and managers. He would shout at anyone for any perceived mistake, real or imagined, that he saw. He was very handsy and often made seedy comments to the attractive young waitresses. Management would often attend events and eat and drink with guests while also making sure nothing was wrong. At one of these events, he got one of the young women in sales so drunk an ambulance had to be called, and she had her stomach pumped. He was just a horrible human being. As you can imagine, everyone from kitchen staff to waiters to managers was making complaints about him. I know that one manager had gone over the head of our general manager and was slowly elevating the issue to higher and higher levels of management, heading towards the national level. The response that our HR department was sticking to was that Houston has been hired to shake things up. Apparently, they had expected a certain amount of friction to occur and had essentially been told to ignore any complaints that came their way. They had taken things through the proper channels and followed the correct procedures. There was nothing they could do. Their hands were tied. Enter our story's hero. So the bar in this hotel was well run by a short Filipino man. We'll call him John. Because there were rarely any real issues at the bar, John had mostly been left alone by Houston. John had never seen Houston's bad side come out and never personally had a problem with him. One day, an issue did come up with the bar. It eventually turned out to be a management miscommunication, which was a very common thing. Thanks, management. But that was irrelevant at the time. So Houston decides that the problem is John's fault and storms into the bar. And while John is serving and in front of staff, customers and a supervisor, Houston absolutely lays into John, just like he has to every other supervisor and manager in his department already. What the heck happened yesterday? A group complained to me this morning that we hadn't charged their account properly. Sort your stuff out and do your job properly next time. Picture this with a large 6-foot tall man getting right in the face of a 5-foot tall Filipino while yelling abuse at absolutely the top of his voice. Houston stormed back to his office. John didn't take stuff like that from anyone, and he followed Houston back to his office while they shouted at each other in front of even more staff, supervisors and another manager. Houston obviously didn't back down or apologize, because this is how he had operated for the last 6 months without any consequences. John went straight up to HR and told them exactly what had happened, and as usual they told him there was nothing they could do. That seemed like it was going to be the end of it. That night, John went home and got some legal advice from a friend. Following the advice, he typed up an objective account of exactly what had happened and included names of all staff who had witnessed the encounter. This showed how many people were able to confirm his story. He emailed this to the entire management team, including team leaders, supervisors and other departments, as well as each person in HR. This eliminated deniability in anyone's account, as well as kept the whole hotel in the loop of what was going on. The next day, John took his written account down to the police station to file charges of workplace assault. He received a document from the police to confirm that he had filed charges. He then sent that document to the same mailing list of management and HR. By the time he arrived at work that afternoon, the GM had started an inquiry into the issue that he had previously been completely unaware of. HR was claiming that they had no idea what had been going on either. This was definitely the first they were hearing of problems with Houston. Over the next few days, everyone in the F&B department from team leader up was called into a meeting to discuss their experiences with Houston. At the end of the week, Houston was notified that he was to attend a meeting with the upper management and HR teams the next day. The next day came and Houston went into his office, picked up his things, walked into the meeting and stamped his note of resignation onto the desk. HR agreed to immediately terminate his contract and he walked out of the job that afternoon. After he left my hotel, he got a job at a small, very average Mexican restaurant as a sommelier. He lasted about 3 months there. A few months later, one of the waitresses caught an Uber home after a night out. Guess who was the driver? The next story is called Not So Smart Billy. Billy was a tugboat captain I worked for about a year. He was a bit of a hick and not especially adept at anything but driving a tugboat and barge. He also had a big mouth and the personality of a rattlesnake. Although every other captain and first mate at this company was from the same general area, none of them really liked Billy, not even his own first mate. Late at night up in the wheelhouse, the first mate would often tell me stories about some of the dumb things Billy said and did over the years. He'd only worked with him for about 5 years or so, but they'd all had known each other for years in this fleet. One of his most often told stories was about Billy shooting his mouth off in some bar years before. I forget what the initial argument was about, but it ended with Billy telling a small group of guys how stupid they were, and, not surprisingly, getting a beating, but bad. His beating was so bad he not only wound up in the hospital, doctors discovered it affected his mental ability somehow. I am cloudy on the details, but Billy fought with the US Coast Guard and had to prove that he was still mentally capable of holding a captain license. It took a while, maybe as much as a year, but he won and went back to work. It was a few years later that I started working for him, until I quit a year later. 3 years later, I found myself near first mate's hometown, having just gotten off my boat. He picked me up and we went out for supper before he dropped me off at the airport. Nice way to catch up on what the old crew was up to. As it turns out, about a year earlier, Billy had smashed into a dock a little too hard and damaged it. It was enough damage to require the Coast Guard to be notified. A long story short, Billy was found at fault and was going to have fines levied against him and or pay for the damage. Billy was never too smart to begin with. He actually tried to fight the Coast Guard's decision. His reasoning? He can't be held responsible due to his diminished mental capacity that resulted from his assault years earlier. You guessed it. The US Coast Guard maliciously complied with his defense and promptly made him surrender his license, and with it his livelihood. First mate said he got a job selling used cars. I never really liked Captain Billy. The third story is called That Didn't Last. I used to work in a mid-sized company in the engineering department. One of the managers started to get upset because if he walked around at exactly 8:30, our start time, everyone was not in their seats. He felt that engineers were being too lax with their time. The edict went out that all engineers had to be in their seats exactly at start time. I told my boss that I was not planning on complying because I was a salaried professional and expected to be treated as such. And that if they didn't trust me to put in an honest week's work, then they should fire me instead of micromanage me. The older and much wiser engineers took a different approach. They all showed up 5 minutes early to make sure they were in their seats at 8:30, but also set an alarm for 5 PM and would literally drop everything they were doing exactly at 5 PM and leave the building. Is the manager having a meeting that was supposed to end at 5 but is running a little late? No, at 5 PM a series of alarms would go off and everyone would stand up in the middle of the meeting to leave. Does operations need technical support at 4:55? They have exactly 5 minutes on the phone with the engineer before he will have to get off the phone. Is someone trying to discuss a work-related issue at 8:28? Better wait a couple of minutes because no one in the engineering department is answering work-related questions for another 2 minutes. Needless to say, the policy didn't last very long. The next story is called Too Hot in Here. This is a story from many years ago, told to me by my friend's father over 30 years ago. My friend's father worked for Sears and Roebuck for years. He held all manners of positions throughout his career. At one point in time, his job included supervising the operators that took your phone calls when you called in to order from the Sears catalog. As I said, this is an old story. Anyway, the operator sat in a room that was contained within the actual store, right off the retail floor, separated by a short hallway and an employees only signed door. This room had 10 or 12 women who all just took calls and recorded orders for products. My friend's dad said they would constantly complain to him that the room was too hot or too cold, often too cold in the morning and too hot the same afternoon, etc. Further, some women would complain it was too cold, while some others at the same time would complain it was too hot. Meanwhile, the temperature of the store was centrally controlled. He had no ability to have the temperature change back and forth on any particular given day, without the actual store manager's approval. What they did was set the whole store to a constant temperature anyway. So basically, my friend's dad would get all these complaints from employees he was managing that he A, didn't really put much stock in as there were no other complaints about the store temperature, and B, couldn't do anything about anyway. So one evening, after the operator's shift was over and the store was closed, he went over to the hardware department and grabbed a thermostat controller. The old school kind that kind of just sat on the wall, had an analog dial to spin and set the temperature wherever you wanted it. He installed it on the wall in the operator's room, but of course didn't connect it to anything. The next day, the ladies all came in to start their shift and my friend's dad came into their room. "Good morning, ladies, I have great news for you. I know you all have been uncomfortable with the temperature in this room for ages, and you know how bad I felt that I wasn't able to do anything to help you. Well, finally, my requests to the store manager have been heard, and the maintenance people connected a thermostat that specifically controls this room's temperature. And they said as long as you don't run the AC below 68 degrees or the heat above 74, you can set it yourself." He pointed to the thermostat controller on the wall and everyone was happy. One of them rocked right over and leaned in and made it a little colder or hotter or whatever. He reminded her that it would take about 15 to 30 minutes for the temperature to stabilize after the set point was changed. From that day forward, and for the 5 years longer that he worked in that department, he never heard another single complaint from them about the temperature. The fifth story is called On Time. I did my apprenticeship with this company, and after 3 years I moved to a standard IT position at a plant near my home. The first 6 months went great, and the communication with colleagues and boss was good until one day. He wanted to talk to me about a few things, but one stuck out like a sore thumb. He asked me to pull my timesheet up where all our log into work and log out of work times are saved. He told me to be on time, because I was 3 times too late in the last 2 months. He would check it regularly and would get back in touch if it happens again. The funny thing is, I was 1 minute too late on these days because of traffic reasons. I drive 25 to 30 minutes and I also stayed longer on these days. So he told me to better plan for it and he wants me to be here exactly at 6. I was furious about this. It seemed like such a useless complaint and just a way of keeping me under control and to mark him as the boss. Normally I would come in at like 5:50. Work time only starts at 6 and leave around the 1:50 mark. Work ends at 1:45 and paid overtime starts 31 minutes after closing time. I would start working before 6 with easy work like mails and stuff and worked a bit overtime because I had to pack up. Now I just drink coffee and stand around while looking at my phone until it is exactly 6 and I log in. No minute early, no minute late. He wants me to work exactly at 6? Okay, I will, but I will also leave when my time is done. I also pack my things neatly so I can log out exactly at 1:45 and I don't stay longer because I need to be on time. Overall, he lost work time with useless power tripping, but he never mentioned the change because he can't do anything about it. The last story is called Printed and Signed. A few years ago, I was working as a software engineer and was tasked with producing a rather large report. This report wound up being around 5,000 pages in length. Our procedure at the time was to print the document, have the reviewers review and sign it by hand, and then give it to the documentation person to be scanned in and released. I knew this was going to be a problem, so I spoke with our QA person in charge of compliance. I suggested that we print the cover sheet and the short main body of the document, but put a large attachment on a CD and route it electronically. But they insisted I had to follow procedure, so I did just that. It took a number of hours and the use of 3 large printers, but I managed to print it all and fit it in a large box. After I routed it, I put it on the documentation person's desk and they presumably flipped their lid. I think it went pretty high up the chain because my manager called me into his office and chastised me, telling me I should have found a different way. I informed him that I tried to get our QA to allow a different routing method, but they insisted. But as per usual, he ignored everything I said. In the end, my manager was set off. The documentation person was angry, but the document got released. More importantly, the next time we needed to release that document, we put the large portions on a CD, just like I suggested. And with that, we end today's video. Let me know what you think about the stories. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the stories and today's video? I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. And I hope you have a great day. Stay safe. Bye bye.